Hey everyone, it's Maria here. It's great to be here with you today on this wintry evening. I've been asked to do a quick video on familial conditioning, and I've actually been given specific questions, which is always great for me, so that I can answer specific, in a specific and in a way that is relevant to the question asker. So I'm just going to go through some questions here from my screen. And if you get any other questions that you'd like me to, address, please just pop them down at the bottom of this or into the comment section of this live video. So more than happy to do that when I get a chance. So welcome to this live video. So let's start with familial conditioning. So a lot of these questions are actually about overcoming familial conditioning. And why do we want to overcome familial conditioning, first of all? Well, we want to overcome it because it's usually the thing that's holding us back most in our life and in our work and on our success journey. Because we don't know what we don't know. It's like fish are not aware of water. So we don't know something that is so obvious to us in terms of how we were brought up. So that's why overcoming negative familial conditioning in particular that might be holding you back on your personal success journey is very important. So I'll just pop on to the questions. What do you mean by familial conditioning? Okay, so familial conditioning is something that it's a type of conditioning that has affected you to become a lot of who you are. So a lot of our personality type, like as we're growing up, especially in the imprint period of our youth, which is usually between kind of the 3 to 7 years of age, but it could be, a little bit on either side of those, of course. What happens is that we become who we are in that time. So a lot of our personality, who we become, is due to familial conditioning. And a lot of people say, are a lot of INFJs, have they all had trauma, or have, every INFP become an INFP because they have trauma, and has this person become this because of that? It's not necessarily that a specific type. This is my observation, this is my opinion. I might change my mind in 10 years time if I have better data to base my opinion on then. But so far what looks to be happening is that we all actually have trauma. We all experience some trauma, which then gives us specific kinds of coping mechanisms. And it's actually the coping mechanisms that we get really good at using that tend to mold our personality, if not create it, then at least make it more of what it already is. So I hope that makes sense. And so familial conditioning is something that we grow up around. This is normal in our family. When I was a child, I didn't realize that it wasn't normal for your father to be drunk all the time. It wasn't until I visited a friend's place and saw that, in fact, this is not normal. This is not how every father behaves. And it opened my eyes to realizing that, what we are taught in our family or in our familial unit isn't necessarily the whole truth. It's the same thing as with, our emotions are not a fact. Well, our familial conditioning is not in fact a defining factor of who we are becoming if you become conscious of it. Okay? So it's really important to understand that who we surround ourselves with, or what atmosphere we grow up in, we become those things because of this kind of conditioning. And the same is true for your family's influence on you. Look at what your mother was like, look at what your father was like, look at what your siblings were like, and look at the kind of the culture of your family and see if in fact there are things that you learned from your family that you might be holding you back right now from your success journey. So I'd really recommend that you do that. So let's go on to the next question. What are some positive types of conditioning? Awesome. Okay. Some positive types of conditioning are sense of safety. So if you have a family unit that was relatively together, if your parents, if you learned about confrontation from your parents in a way that they were doing it in a really positive way and like as a team, as opposed to butting heads and being against one another all the time, a type of positive conditioning is being able to deal with confrontation or being able to deal with challenging situations, and communication is one. You might have really good communication if in your family it was normal to communicate, and other things like being open to learning and new things, and like not being necessarily attached to your own persona. Not needing to be right, not being able to share. Those kinds of things can be examples of positive types of familial conditioning. And the next question then becomes, what are some types of negative conditioning? And of course, there's so many different things. So anything that you consider to be traumatic, things like, personally for me, it was made very implicit. It wasn't implicit. It was explicit that I was the reason why my father was so unhappy all the time. So that kind of conditioning then brought me to a place where I had to continuously try to figure out what the person in front of me needed and give it to them, no matter what I needed, so that that person would not think that I was the problem or I was the reason why they were so unhappy. So if that makes sense. So it's a kind of it's a bit dark example, but I find that personal, real life examples are usually the best. So that's one example. So you kind of learn your own value or your worth depending on where you kind of fall into the hierarchy of your family. So if your family was very hierarchical in nature, then you learn that type of thing, and that you can feel inferior to others, and of course you can feel superior to others, which is also not a positive kind of familial conditioning. There's so many different things. You could learn that you're not good enough. You could learn that you're not pretty enough, fast enough, smart enough, whatever enough, something. You're not something enough. That's usually a very kind of negative familial conditioning, or very usual. I think everybody can relate to something like that. And then of course there's the kind of familial conditioning that comes with parenting styles that are very allowing and very facilitating, where no boundaries are really set appropriately. So we don't learn appropriate boundaries about what we can and can't do, how we can and can't communicate with other people, those kinds of things. So if you have absent parenting, or if you had really allowing parenting, you might have issues with people setting boundaries with you because you're simply not used to it, and it doesn't make you a bad person or anything. So I'm not being critical. It's just a fact of how it is. Okay, so the next question: what was the most recent situation where you, Maria, had to deal with a negative type of conditioning? Okay, this is an interesting and very interesting question, and there's a possibility that the answer is going to be pretty long, so bear with me, because the most recent kind of a negative type of familial conditioning that I came across was when my aunts attacked me for speaking my mind. And what happened was that I said things about my childhood experience and made a comment about my father, which they didn't agree with, or at least one of them didn't agree with. But, it's really hard to say because they were interacting with each other around this issue a lot. So there was a lot of back and forth between them, which I wasn't privy to. So I don't really know exactly what happened. But what I can say is that they didn't agree with me speaking up about my experience and how things were for me. And so their attitude towards me seemed to be, and I'm saying seemed to be because I don't know it, I can only go with how they were behaving towards me, seemed to be that as we were growing up, they were very helpful, for my family because they knew what my father was like, but they didn't know the whole story because they didn't in fact live with us. But the most recent kind of negative familial conditioning for me was this hierarchical thing where my aunts genuinely, it appears that they thought that they knew better what my life experience was as a child, and they weren't interested in finding out as 2 or 3 grown-ups to converse about what was going on, and rather I should, because I'm the child, so I'm like the younger generation, that children should be seen, not heard, that type of mentality. And that was, I was actually quite shocked about it because I wasn't particularly close with these people anyway. I hadn't seen them for years. I've been living abroad for 20 years, so I wasn't sure where they were coming from. But because there was no direct communication about where they were coming from, or they weren't interested in actually having a grown-up to grown-up conversation around this, it was just like, you should just accept what we're saying, and that's just how it is. And of course, that's not how life works. So I felt like a lot of my personal experience on this in the recent times has been around breaking through that hierarchical respect, kind of a hierarchy where if you're younger, you need to respect the other person no matter how they behave towards you. And I'm sure, some of you, or if not all of you, can relate to some of this. So it's just, the challenge is to navigate through these issues without losing the sight of the bigger picture. So, it can be challenging to get involved in the kind of the negative nitty-gritty stuff, the kind of the second level, third level kind of conversations where the situation doesn't actually go forward. So it's really important when you're in it, when you're feeling, if you're ever feeling attacked, or if you feel like you're not being supported by your family, to kind of keep the big picture of, I'm growing into my own person and they might have an issue about it, kind of an attitude. But let's move on to the next question. What are the ways people can overcome negative familial conditioning? Okay, excellent question. Number one thing is become aware of it, because you can't change something you don't acknowledge. So become aware of it, whatever way you can. So if you have trusted people around you, you can ask people, hey, is there anything that you see me doing on a regular basis that you feel is holding me back from what I want to do in life? That's a really good question to ask people, but only ask people who you trust, whose opinion you trust, so that you don't end up with people dumping their stuff on you. The other thing is observe what happens. Life gives you reflections. So if you continue to have a reflection that a lot of people around you don't agree with a specific thing on a fundamental level, then you might want to just examine where you're coming from. I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm just saying ask yourself these questions. How would this situation look to me if I was looking it through these person's eyes that are reflecting back to me that maybe I need to? Because you can always just not. You might look through their eyes and find out that it's not right for you, and you just go back into, the old way of being, or the way that has worked for you in the past, or that feels authentic to you. So it's important to be open, but also take responsibility for who you allow to influence you. So what are the ways people can overcome negative familial conditioning? So firstly, become aware of it. And then secondly, be prepared to learn new skills and be prepared to fail. You have these blind spots, so to speak, because you never learned the skills, okay? So you can't fix the blind spots until you learn the skills. And you can't learn the skills if you berate yourself for not learning the skills fast enough. So have this positive kind of forward thinking momentum. I will learn what I need to learn in order to, to do this thing differently. And then give yourself an opportunity to fail at least 30 times before you make any judgment about whether you're succeeding in the learning process or not. You need to allow yourself to learn one thing at a time and reinforce the positive learning. And especially when we're learning new ways of being, especially when we're breaking familial conditioning, that can take months, if not years. So you need to be kind with yourself. Remember, you're looking to effectively parent yourself in a way that you weren't parented. Because the way you were parented gave you the skills that you now have, and you don't have these skills. So therefore, you are effectively reparenting yourself with a supportive, loving, caring, forward-going attitude. Okay. And what kind of negative familial conditioning do you have? Okay, so I think that we covered. But let me ask you this. In the audience, what kind of negative conditioning do you have? What have you what have you realized? If you haven't realized any of the negative conditioning, ask yourself, what could be there? Like, what are the challenges that are holding me back in my life at the moment? And maybe even ask the help of the Introvert Success Initiative forum to give reflections. If you have a recurring situation that keeps coming up time and time and time again, make sure that, just describe the situation a little bit and say, this is what keeps happening and these are the different forms that it takes. You don't have to do a big long post, just kind of the highlights, and see if anybody else here has really great pattern recognition skills and might be able to give you some guidance and some support around that. So definitely use this forum for that. Let me just double check that I didn't get any further questions. Okay, yeah. No, just, please interact. Leave your comments below. If you're wondering if you're a new member, don't be shy. We're all here to support each other. So we're all at the same level. There's no hierarchy here. Just contribute, and as much as you contribute to this group, you will receive back as well. So thanks so much for your time. Have a really great morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you are. Have a good night if it's nighttime for you. I'm going to retire for the day, and I'll see you real soon.